Hey everyone, this is the Innovator's Mindset with Christine Dyer. There we go. Christine,
Hello, hello.
excited to have you on. All right. So I actually met Christine. I was just at the Tech Mind Schools, Tech Mind Conference event, keynoting there in San Juan, Puerto Rico, just outside San Juan. And you reached out to me before, and you said something. I'm like, yeah, just you should come on my podcast. And then we met there, and I know you're doing some really interesting stuff that I do not have any expertise in. So that's why we bring other people on the podcast. So I'm really excited to talk to you. Before I get into your introduction, I was going to ask you this question right before. I don't know if this is intentional, but you have a shirt that just says everything in time, and it's like sticking out to me.
Yeah,
Was that intentional? Like, what? Why is it just that's the shirt? Because like I wear shirts.
it's
Tell me about it.
it's totally intentional.
I'm glad I asked
I
that.
bought it. Yeah, I bought it with a friend when I was in Santa Marta, Colombia this Christmas. But I really liked it because it speaks for everything I stand for in education and the idea of raising humans, especially teens, that are whole and ready for the future. As if we can be patient with their with time and their perception of it, then they can accomplish about everything.
You have like an interesting philosophy on time, and I think that, and we'll get into some of that experience, and I really appreciate it because I am something I work on is like I don't have much patience in life, and I know that it hurts me as a teacher with wait time, this and yeah. So I do appreciate that because I do agree with the sentiment. It's hard to do sometimes, and so maybe you'll give us some strategies on that. But
Yeah.
Christine, before we get into some of your experience and the work that you're doing currently, can you just tell us who you are, what you do today, and how you got there?
Yeah, so my name is Christine Delaney Dyer. Right now, today, I'm in Guatemala City. I am a recently retired educator and interdisciplinary PhD student and the CEO of my brand new business.
Love it.
How did I get here? I got here through 25 years of education and being raised by educators, and just having the desire to chase my own learning this year instead of staying in the classroom with my students.
Yeah, and I'm looking at your website. It's missdyer.com. You can see it. I'll put the link in the show notes down below, so you want to check it out no matter where you're watching or listening. And you say education should feel like growing, not grinding, which I love that because I think a lot of times as adults we get into the grinding of education, but we're not necessarily growing ourselves. And I intentionally seek out conversations. Like one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on is because I don't know your stuff and because I don't know about the work that you do, and I want to learn more about it because I think that's these conversations are really crucial to
Yeah.
that. So, can you just tell a little bit? You briefly mentioned that you do have a business, and you say seed to tree academic coaching. So, tell us a little bit about what that looks like and where you do, because I know this is not something just for
Sure.
Guatemala City, but anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I've tutored students in Guatemala, in Mexico, and in different areas of the United States. So one thing about the way that I tutor and the reason why I call it academic coaching
Mm.
is because my main skills and expertise are, literacy and writing, both, writing to learn and writing to explain your learning, which are interdisciplinary focuses.
Yep.
Also, though, because I have been in so many different education systems and educational cultures, I have started to establish some structures that really help me work anywhere.
Mm.
So within those structures, I can help kids and adults work on not just their communication skills and their active listening and really listening to understand and communicating, empowering their voice, I can do all of that, but also I help coach them through, okay, what does it feel like to actually sit and write for 3 minutes? Knowing that young adults' perception of time, it feels much different than ours, even if,
Right.
logically it's the same.
Yeah, and you said this to me before. I'm going to ask you more about that. You mentioned writing to learn because that's something I'm very interested in. But you told me right before that some of the structures and the process of what you do. You're in Guatemala. You said, hey, if I worked at the school in Puerto Rico, they wouldn't even need technology or internet to make this happen. So can you kind of walk us through what you mean by that and what that looks like? Because technology is like a
Yeah.
big conversation right now in education. And so I'm really interested in what you're going to say about that.
Totally. And that conversation, within the education world is also going to have to come head
Yep.
to head with like the ecological world, right? I mean, so we, might really like leaning into tech, and it definitely has its benefits, but anytime we have to rely on an external source of power,
Right.
as we saw in Puerto Rico,
Yep.
we can't necessarily count on that. And what I finally started to realize over different continents and places was that if I just went back to the things that I first had to do before we had laptops or even
Right.
computers in our classrooms, I started in like my practicum and teaching in classrooms in 1997. So there are so many skills that my mentors at that time built within me in order to set up conversations where the students are carrying the labor, the students are carrying the work, and also you don't have to rely on the power and the energy. Do you want me to, can
Yeah,
I
keep going.
explain the two I
Please.
did?
I love it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so my favorite one I did in Puerto Rico is circle, square, triangle, chicken. And so what happens is students are in groups of threes or fours, and they decide who is the circle, who is the square, who is the triangle, and who is the chicken. Then we draw those things on their desks, and then um, the topic of conversation comes out. In Puerto Rico, I asked people, how would you use the previous discussion structure in your classroom? So everybody's got like their own little response. So then all that happens is I have a bunch of I have popsicles in my hand that are circle, square, triangle, and chicken. And somebody who feels powerful at that moment pulls a stick and says, okay, it's circles. So circles get 1 minute on the clock to explain their idea. And then we stop, we talk about some things, and then it goes on to the next shape and the next shape and the next shape. And during this time, there's collaborative and independent note taking. And so then at the end, any person in the group can be chosen to be the person who educates the whole room of people on what that group talked about, referencing each student by name, giving specific examples of what they said. So that is a structure where, you don't need power, you don't need anything except 4 popsicle sticks.
One of the things that I just love that you shared is one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And if you can actually teach
Yes.
something to someone else, then you have to know it on a very deep level. There was something I wrote recently talking about some of the things that you're referencing. And I don't know sometimes if we forget how to learn as adults. And I'm very cognizant of like scheduling time to write, if not, I try to daily, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes I know this sounds weird. Even this podcast with you is a form of learning for me, listening, having conversation with you, asking
Yeah.
follow-up questions and things like that. And of course we're doing that virtually, but we could do it in person as well. I also will like sit at a Starbucks and say, I'm going to write a blog post today, have no clue what I'm going to write, and just sit there until like something. And I'll find some
Yes.
reading. And I love that you said that because earlier you said like sometimes I write to share learning and write to learn, and that's something I didn't really realize until I actually left school. So how do we as like educators and teachers because I don't know if that's really an emphasis. I know that's a weird thing to say. A lot of times it's just about the sharing of the learning, but not actually to learn. And that process of like writing or, you know, creating something, not to share what I know, but to actually to learn and to
Sure.
bring out ideas with you. How do you help with that process?
So, you know, I I follow this educator, Liz Kleinrock, and I have for a long time. And she has this amazing quote of what we permit, we promote. And so I think, when I hear things about, educators like not knowing how to learn anymore, or even adults not knowing how to learn anymore, it automatically makes me contextualize them and put them within a system that probably doesn't permit and therefore doesn't promote the time necessary for this. And I find like no matter who I'm talking to, George, whether it is members of a school board or a director's board or a principal or a classroom teacher, even students, the number one pushback that people will have to the type of well structured, intentionally looped education that I believe in is there's no time because we've been conditioned to
Right.
think that everything can happen really quickly, So I would say instead of putting one more thing on teachers' shoulders and asking them to like go home and find time to write or find time to process, it starts on the school level. It starts with the people who have the power saying, you know what we're going to do on Fridays? We're all just going to bring a notebook or whatever, and we're going to write. And then when you're done, you can talk a little and you go home. I mean, it is as simple as time, but it's also as difficult as time.
You know, it's like I swear you snuck in, you read my blog that I just wrote. I swear, okay, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love what I'm gonna share with you. So as a principal, we wanted every student to have a digital portfolio. Okay. So we wanted every student to have a digital portfolio. And the thing with me was I wanted every teacher to have one as well. Because and sometimes teachers would do it on one thing, students would do it on another thing. Well, what does that mean for a teacher? They gotta learn two things because they gotta be able to teach the second thing. So I'm like, no, you're gonna use the same thing the students are using. And as you said, you can't just say you're going to do this and then not give any time. So what I did with one of my, I think you're going to love this. What I did with one of my staff communities was I taught them like kind of the nuts and bolts of the process, and we had like an 8:30 to 3 p.m. PD day. So I taught them for about till like 9:30. And I said, hey, here's what we're going to do.
Okay.
From 9:30 till 2:30. You're on your own. All I need from you is I want you to write this. I showed you how to do it. And if you need more support, I'll be here in the library. So like if you still are not unsure how to do this, I'll be here. You can do it here. You can do it at Starbucks. You can do it at a restaurant. You can do it now. You can do it later. At 2:30 p.m., we're going to read each other's stuff. So I gave them way more time than they needed, for sure. But I
Sure.
wanted them to do this. And I also wanted them to kind of, some people went and sat with groups at lunch. Some of them wanted to be on their own. And they all went in totally different ways. And the
Yeah.
accountability was built in that we're going to read each other's at 2:30. So you got to get done. Right. So,
Yes.
but I'm giving you like, you probably need 30 minutes max. Right. But I'm giving you way more. And I actually said, like the worst thing possible is that they would get done early and then work on things in their classroom. It's like,
Yes.
and so it's funny because I got pushback from my superintendent about it at the time. And he pushed back because he wanted to understand what we're doing. He's like, listen, you're supposed to be here from like 8:30 till 12, and then 12 to 1, they get a break, and then 1 to 3. I said, listen, I understand you're looking at a structure. Show me one other school in the district right now that can give you evidence of teacher learning. Show me one. Because they were there didn't mean they learned anything, right? They were just, I know they were
Yes.
there. Here's every teacher on my staff, you could read what they learned today. And it was like interesting because I think there's ways that you can do what you're saying. And even the session that you sat in that I led, I had people write before to kind of like go through their own stuff and made time in the session, which makes it
Yeah.
much more conversational. So I love that because I 100% agree with you. Like, if you think learning for adults matters, you have to build in that time. Don't expect it to be done on your own because there's other stuff as well.
I agree. I agree. And um, when I was in Puerto Rico, I thought a lot about what is it exactly that I have the skills and the drive to do, identifying the gap, like where is the gap? And I realized the gap is that I can provide intergenerational professional development. So, in fact, I'm speaking with a principal in Puerto Rico over email right now about possibly bringing these structures to their school because what we mapped out was. What if instead of having a professional development where all the teachers are in one place learning something that they're going to have to teach to the kids, what if the professional development revolved around something that all humans are struggling which is patient
Hmm.
communication, and so part of these discourse structures that I run, they operate in a 5-day loop. And, that gives like a lot of predictability, a lot of comfort, even for shy speakers, a lot of opportunity for reflection. But also, like what you're to the point of what you're saying, George, there's authentic audience and therefore buy-in worked into these, where through these discussions, the writing and the talking and the notes from the listening, and you're also providing evidence of your own learning and growth.
Love that.
So, my idea is to kind of look at what are the values, the mission statements of the school, and then how do we run these intergenerational conversations where people can actually learn from the lived experiences of others. We could practice reverse mentorship, and then those structures can be used anytime we find ourselves face to face, whether it be a department meeting or a PLC or an IEP. And that way, all participants in the community would already know how it is that their voice will be heard. They will have the space for that, and that the other people are actually listening.
I love that. And I think that matters because, there's a lot of, even in that session that you were a part of, I really challenge people to share what they wanted to learn. So, and also to push back on some of the things I was saying because I'm still trying to grow. And I think when you do that, I'm leading the session. And when you're saying like, "Hey, I might be wrong," so like give me some context because you don't know everyone's experience, you don't know everyone's context, and I think that matters when
Yeah,
no matter your role, if you're the superintendent and you think you know everything, then you're not tapping into, and it's like that's we grow as a community.
yeah,
I'm gonna ask you.
yes.
I got one last question for you, and I'm gonna have to time
Okay.
out. I don't know if this is public news, but you mentioned that you're gonna be. Can I say this about Guatemala and you're moving?
Oh, yes, of course. Of
Yeah, I don't know.
course. Yeah.
I don't want to inform an employer before you do. But you shared that you're in Guatemala and then you're going back to Alaska for I think it was
Yeah.
you said your son's senior year in high school and wanted
Yeah.
that experience. So I don't have the extremes of light that you did, right? So I'm in Florida, but I used to live in Edmonton. In Edmonton, it could be daylight in summer from like 4 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then it could be dark, in winter from like 8:30 a.m. to
Yeah.
4:30 p.m. And it affects you. And
Yes.
there's something,
Yes.
you're going from then Florida is kind of like, it's within an hour or two, no matter the season. So it's like a very different. Uh, Tell me. So you're like, I want to dispel this about, it's like talk a little bit about that experience and like, you said there's connection with time, and kind of go back to
Yeah.
your shirt, everything in time. Like, tell me a little bit about that experience, and how, and even like if you want to feel like free to share, like I'm curious, like it's a big transition
Sure.
for your family to go there. I know you grew up there, but it's very different from being in Guatemala.
Yeah. It definitely, My PhD dissertation right now is about something I like to call the sunflower discussion cycles. And if you were on my website on your computer, you probably saw a picture of like two little blonde kids next to this
Hey.
gigantic sunflower, right? So that sunflower was grown in the span of 8 weeks in Alaska,
Yeah.
and right. So, I really think about the ecosystem and the environment around us needs to control not just our perception of time more, but our feeling of time. So when it's time for a lot of light and for that sunflower just to be able to grow, that's great. That's the time. Maybe we're moving fast then. But then also there's a time in the winter where animals are and people are straight up hibernating. And so then like things need to slow down because part of the environmental context is telling us that growth necessitates time, and it's going to take more time in one part of the year than it is in the other. And so that was something I was really proud of once I made that distinction, the way it felt for myself. And then I was able to transfer that over to my students by planting sunflowers with them, talking about how they grew root down, who or what is the sun. If you think about the fact that a student is a seed, there are all these like amazing introspective questions that just setting up this one little system of a sunflower can do. So, all of that was kind of sparked from it consists growing up in Alaska and in Salcha, Alaska, this little tiny town where everything was controlled by nature. And then you move other places and you find out, wait, there's places where it doesn't snow and it's not dark.
Yeah.
So
As
yeah.
as a Canadian, I get that right away. So, I do, and it is cool. And you had mentioned that you're going back there as a family because your son wanted to go back, have a year. And I often think about where I grew up and how it shaped me, and it's obviously it shaped a lot of what you are. And it's pretty cool that you're sharing that with the world. So it was great that you reached out to me because you're like, hey, like I'd love to be on a project. I'm like, okay, so right. So
Yeah.
so I appreciate your time. I appreciate meeting you. So everyone, if you can connect with Christine, you can check out her site, msdyer.com. It is actually in the link down below. And just make sure you connect with her. And she's got a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of ways that she can help your community. So, Christine, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and say hi to everyone, to your family. So it is very cool to connect with you again.
Thank you, George. It was awesome to connect with you. Thank you so much for being such an interesting person to talk to. And if there's a next time, I was waiting for you to talk to me about basketball. I'm a huge Duke
Oh,
fan, Trajan Langdon, Alaska.
listen, don't even get me started there. We are in the middle of tonight. Listen, it's 3 o'clock here. I'm like 4 hours away from a Magic Pistons game right now. So I'm like all in on the Orlando Magic. So
Okay.
yeah, Duke, Wendell Carter Jr. Oh, Paolo Banchero.
No, Duke. I first started liking Duke in like the early 90s.
Right, but Paolo Banchero is our main player. He's from Duke.
Oh, see, I
Let's
I
go.
didn't know that.
Oh,
I'm too old
see.
school for that. That's a great connection.
Yeah, okay. You're like Christian Leitner days. I gotcha. Christian Leitner brought
Yeah,
like that
ooh,
stuff.
that's rough. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, hey, so I usually try to leave the basketball talk at the end because most people are tuned out by then. So anyway, anyways, because as soon as I start talking basketball, they leave early. So I'm glad we saved it to the end. But Christine, hey, thanks so much, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.